I'm Larry D'Amico, and basically I'm doing a talk on um, the Vertigo of Color, which is a show coming to the Metropolitan Museum in October. Um, and it should be a pretty exciting show, actually. Um, and so, uh, over an intense 9 weeks in the summer of 1905, in the modest fishing village of Collioure on the French Mediterranean, Henri Matisse and Andre Duran embarked on a partnership that led to a wholly new, radical, artistic language, later known as Fauvism. So we might as well get to what this Fauvism means. You probably already know it means wild beasts, but if you don't, that's what it meant. And that label was given to this group after this summer. They Matisse and Derain and a group of other artists, Maurice Van Link, George Braque, Rouault. There's a group of about 12 artists that were included in this what became known as the Fauvist group. And so they had a gallery in the salon, and basically there was a sculpture that was in the middle of this gallery that was a kind of neoclassical sculpture that was Donatello-esque, shall we say. And so the critic who came through was just flabbergasted. He didn't quite know what to make of this work that he came upon. It was so wild, and he came back and said this is like Donatello among the wild beasts. So the name stuck, and basically, I think the group of artists kind of liked the name, so they stuck with it. So what is this Fauvis business? Okay. They're daring, energetic experiments with color, form, structure, and perspective changed the course of French painting. It marked an introduction to early modernism and introduced Matisse's first important body of work in his long career. This exhibition emphasizes, as never before, the legacy of that summer and examines the paintings, drawings, watercolors of Matisse and Derain through 65 works on loan from national and international museums. With this new direction in painting, Matisse and Duran manipulated color in radical ways. Nature took on hues responding to the artist's sensation rather than reality. This show is put together from the Metropolitan and the Houston Museum of Fine Art. The ideas in this work really evolved out of post-impressionism. Gauguin, Van Gogh, Cézanne, Seurat through Signac, actually. So Matisse knew Derain from Paris. Matisse was older. He was 35 at the time, which is not that old, but older. And Derain was 25. So he invited Derain to go out to Collioure with him and paint for the summer. So they went off on this adventure. end. They used large areas of color, planes of pure color, often straight from the tube to achieve these vibrant effects. You can see where the inspiration and the excitement came from when I show you some images like this. And basically, if you look at the painting on the right, you can see that this is just basically looking from a different angle at this set of red tile roofed buildings. So there's just a lot of excitement and enthusiasm for this. This is really a recent shot of Couleur, so you can imagine that it was quite wonderful. And you can see the configuration of the mountains, and that this is basically an interpretation of this landscape. And this is Matisse's watercolor. I have never seen Matisse's watercolors before. They're fabulous watercolors. I've included a few of them in this presentation. I haven't found any place where they're reproduced in books yet, but I'm going to keep an eye out for them. So Matisse did this series of watercolors, and it's evident he had a real feel for them. Wish he'd done more. Okay. So one of the things that these guys were engaged in was using color oppositions, opposite colors on the color wheel to create more vibrance, the interaction of those colors. So the orange against the blue, the green against the red, would tend to pick up the intensity of the color. So the Fauvists favored pairing complementary colors like purple and yellow, magenta and green, orange and blue. These are often opposite sides of the color wheel, and were often picked for the main color palette for the Fauvist paintings, as well as using it at high saturation. Fauvism was known for bold, vibrant, almost acidic colors used in unusual juxtaposition, and intuitive, highly gestural application of paint. The artists of the Fauve were experimenting with ways in which color could be liberated from subject matter. In other words, they were not trying, this is not realism. They are not trying to like the Impressionists, capture nature or really follow naturalistic colors, more muted tonal colors and things like that were basically the early landscape painters like Corot and the Barbizon school were much more muted. These guys were just letting it fly. Characteristic elements of Fauvist painting: colors that express feelings. Colors are not faithful to reality, but are faithful to what the artist feels. Emotive distortion, predominant feeling, the joy of living, especially with the French. The German expressionists are a different matter, and I will talk about them a little bit. Violent color contrasts, energetic brushstrokes, simple drawing, flat figures with delineated contours, large patches or planes of color interacting. Oh, these split complementary colors are really interesting too, because basically, you know, you can have warm and cool, but they're you know, they can be one cool and two warm, or two cool and one warm, and then the amount of color in relationship to each other was something which they played with a lot in the work. So Fauve artists use pure, brilliant color, aggressively applied straight from the tube, to create a sense of an explosion on the canvas. The Fauve painted directly from nature, as the Impressionists had before, but the Fauve works were invested with strong expressive reactions to the subject portrayed. Duran would have been well aware of Van Gogh's trailblazing work. So I put up this olive tree with yellow sky from Van Gogh, and you can see the relationship between those twisted limbs and the olive trees and the trees in Duran's piece on the left. Now there's this really vigorous brushwork. I mean, the Van Gogh is much more thickly painted, a lot more impasto in this particular painting, and the Duran is much lighter and looser, and the directionality of the brushwork is really important in both pieces. But you can see the direct relationship between the Van Gogh and the Duran. So Gauguin really kind of endowed his paintings and his colors with a symbolic meaning, but he used these big flat planes of color. There were a whole group of painters called the Neve, who grouped together in the late 1880s. Gauguin, excuse me, Gauguin worked with them, and for me, this the Sarasur piece on the right is really kind of a Fauvist piece. Sarasur was out there with Gauguin, and he was looking across this pond, and Gauguin said to Sarasur, what do you see? What do you feel in this tree? What color do you feel in it? And he said, well, yellow. And Gauguin said, well, use the brightest yellow you have in your palette. And so this painting is called The Talisman. It was embodying the concept of using pure color as an expressive, almost spiritual means of expression. So this painting is on the back of a cigar box. It's a tiny thing. It was a little panel of wood, but they named it the Talisman because it kind of gave you a direction. The Nebe meant prophet in Hebrew. So these guys were really pursuing some kind of a visionary aspect. Now, this was in 1888, a full 10, 12 years before the Fauve. but the indications were already going in this direction, the independence of color from realistic depiction. Okay. And of course, Cézanne. Again, Cézanne would use complementary colors. If you look at this painting, the greens in the foreground are illuminated or set off the warm stone of the quarry behind them. That tension where the green is in front of this warm orangey red, it tends, the warm colors want to come forward, and he's pressed that green against them. So there's a tension that's happening on this flat surface that's really something which Cézanne played with a lot in his work. And then, you know, the blue tends to recede so that the mountain, though it's got some warm patches in it, in front of the cooler blue of the sky, really gives you these layers going back into the distance. Again, the brushwork, the directionality of the brushwork, really is a very important compositional element. It becomes really a cue for many of the movements to follow in the 20th century. Cubism picked up on these patches and carried that further. But the Fauve looked at this and took it in. So the other thing I want to say at this point is this was a very short-lived movement. It was really the first modernist movement in the, excuse me, I'm going to get myself a cough drop because I seem to be fogging up here. This was the first modernist movement in the 20th century. And it was short-lived. It was really, the dates that they give it are 1904 through 1908 as the essential period. I would take it back to about 1900 and stretch it out to about 1912 as the real period of time. But the concentrated group worked on this project from about 1904 to 1908. And one of the stopping points for it, or one of the next steps after Fauvism, is the big Cézanne retrospective that took place after Cézanne's death in 1906. In 1907, there was a gigantic show, groundbreaking show of Cézanne's work, a retrospective. And this just shattered everything. And many, you know, Braque began to go in a different direction. So did Duran after seeing that show. Okay, enough with Cézanne. So this is Signac. And in fact, Matisse worked with Signac in 1904. He went to Saint-Tropez and painted outdoors with Signac. Signac was really a follower of Seurat. Really wanted to pursue this notion of what they call optical mix. And that was one of the things that's the concepts that Seurat worked with, was putting down dabs of color next to each other. So putting down a blue and a yellow supposedly from a distance would become a green. Their optical science has come to different places with this stuff, but that was actually a kind of scientific concept that was going around at that time. Signac saw how long it took Seurat to paint a painting. He only completed 7, I believe it was 7, it's 7 or 8 works in his lifetime, large-scale pieces. And Signac said, well, this is all well and good, but I want to paint more paintings than 7 or 8 paintings in my lifetime. So he created something called Divisionism, where he painted with these dabs, these longer strokes next to each other. And this is something that Matisse picked up on and worked with. And I will show you this. And this is one of Matisse's, it's a tiny piece. It's 5 by 6 inches. And here is Derain's version. And these are slightly larger, don't have the sizes here, but freedom is implied by the sense of color being used as a non-descriptive element rather than to describe subjects in a realistic manner. This freeing of color from formal description was the basis of Fauvism. And you can see, again, this business of opposites on the color wheel, the complementary colors, the orange next to the blue, the green next to the red, the violet next to the yellow. So this was something which they were really interested in pursuing. And here's the subject matter for this and this. So you get, you know, where they were, and you kind of get where they drew these from, but that's a very different interpretation from the photographic image. And again, that's one of the reasons why they were pursuing this, because this is something that a camera cannot do. So if you want realism, take a photograph. And this was something which actually came up earlier when photography was first invented. It was one of the motivations of the Impressionists going outdoors and trying to actually capture the fleeting experience of being in nature, where these guys are going further and they're saying, what is the inner experience of being out there in nature? Okay. And here is a wonderful set of portraits. Again, look at the Duran, and on the left, the Duran portrait of Matisse. So you have all of it here. There's the green and the red. There's the play of the blue against the orange. There's the violet against the yellow. So he's got it all in this one painting. Beautifully painted too. I mean, really, those slabs of color and the spontaneity of the marking. But he definitely got Matisse. And the Matisse of Duran is quite interesting also. And again, the vigorous marking and all of that, very loose, very, let this thing happen and let it come out spontaneously. And back to Vincent. Okay, so the idea of using complementary colors as a way to make a painting more vivid and more intense, emotionally impactful, is something that Van Gogh was very much exploring. And this painting was back in 1888, so there is precedent for it. Looking at the brushwork in this piece and the spaces between the brushes, especially in the garden, it's very vivid. The spaces between them, and we'll explore this a little bit more in Duran, especially a little bit later on. I have some images where it's directly taken in some ways from the Van Gogh. The window in the studio on the left, again, the window is something which in Western art has been a symbol for the inner world looking out, the outer world looking in. It's also the canvas itself is considered a window. That was a way of thinking about a painting in Western art for many years. And Matisse picked up on this, and we're going to go forward now. Okay. And so, he continued with this window as symbol. It was one of the themes throughout Matisse's career. He comes back again and again to the window, looking out, to the window, letting in light, to, various approaches to it. One of the things I wanted to talk about was, in his long and storied career, you can see this theme, and he was very aware of the idea of looking out the window into reality, or looking out that window to an inner vision. I mean, if you look at this painting, what's going on out there? You look at the photograph and you see there's a mountain across the bay. There's various things going on out there. With Matisse, you have these few slabs of color, the light green, the pink, the light green, and then the violet, and this vigorous brushwork out there, indicating the sky. And the interior is just these slabs of color, these solid slabs of color that offset all this activity going on outside that window. If you look at it, it's a very abstract piece. These brush marks are boats, but how little marking can you use to indicate what a boat is, and what's going on with all of that? Again, we've got a predominant red and green composition, a little bit of blue, a little bit of orange, but the brushwork is really amazing out the window. Okay, there's all this activity inside that brushwork. Okay, so here are a couple of details of the composition, um, and you can see that that beautiful loaded impasto brushwork out the window, and the simplicity with which he kind of dashes off. You know, this is a thing of how little can you use to indicate what a thing is and just have it be as fresh as possible. It's not a very large painting. It's 22 by 18 inches, but a lot of impact in this little piece. And again, it's another version, a kind of dreamlike vision in this world of complementary colors. You know, you've got this dreamer on the bed, and again, very small painting, loosely painted. Okay, and here are our guys: Matisse on the right, Duran in the middle, and actually, this is a 1903 self-portrait by Derain. Again, like I said, they say Fauvism was from 1904 to 1908, but those edges kind of push out. For me, that, you know, this self-portrait's a pretty good Fauvis piece, but this is where he was pre-color. Okay. So again, these two paintings were, I believe, painted in color. The centerpiece is Matisse's wife, Emily, and he did several versions of this. There's the other piece that you may be familiar with the woman with the green stripe. That's again one of the things that I would say he picked up on from Cézanne was subjecting his wife to many portraits, and I think Matisse was a lot faster at it than Cézanne was, though. So this piece was in the Fauvis show, and Leo Stein, basically in 1905, came through the show, and he saw this painting, and he said, "This is the ugliest clot of paint I've ever seen." And then he bought the piece. So he actually became one of Matisse's biggest collectors of this early phase of his work. He just admired the audacity of the piece. And we don't know exactly what's going on with this Carmen Miranda hat on her head. But she's, I think she's holding a fan, and maybe that's the green thing that's going vertically is the end of an umbrella or the arm of a chair. Not quite sure what's going on with that paw. And none of that matters. What matters is the speed with which he captures what he's after and moves on. And he gives us this thing which is, at this time, something quite unique. It's really a groundbreaking painting. And on the left, Duran is no slouch when it comes to figurative painting. Pretty good piece. And you can see what, you know, the likeness is there for the Matisse. Okay. And I'm just gonna let this one be here for a minute. And as I said of the Van Gogh, I think that Duran picked up on the space between the brush marks, and there's a kind of buoyance in the strokes, especially in the foreground, where he leaves those white spaces between the strokes, and that white or negative space between the strokes is very active. It's really part of the composition. It's kind of magic, the way that those strokes activate the white. The white is as active as the part that's painted. Glorious color. Just, you know, one of the things about these paintings is there's a real joy of just putting that paint on, putting those slabs of color next to each other, and just sailing on. This was really a high point in Duran's career. These pieces are magnificent. They're the saturation of color, the sense of enthusiasm, excitement. He's 25 years old and out there painting with Matisse. Not a bad deal. And here's a Matisse from the same locale, basically, fishing boats. So they were painting and drawing out there every day. They did literally, I mean, between the two of them, they must have done hundreds of drawings out there. I don't know how many of the watercolors were done by Matisse, but I'd like to find out. Anyway, you can see the subject matter. You can see the trace in the drawing of the outline of these buildings in the photograph. And again, you can see the buildings off to the right-hand corner of the Duran painting up there, and see the indication of the hillside. He's actually used the shapes that are out there in nature to his own end. Again, really beautiful, saturated painting. And this is before and after couleur. This is a Duran painted in 1904, 1905, before they spent the summer out there. And Passage Provençal is painted in 1906, which is after they've come back from color. And this actually is getting into the old man's territory. This was kind of the legendary land of Cézanne. So he was already beginning to exert an influence on the structural approach that Derain was using. You can see that, you know, that there's that the elements of the linear shapes were kind of giving structure to this painting in a very different way. And Derain in 1906 went to London and did a whole series of these really fabulous paintings. His dealer had encouraged Monet to go to London and do a series of paintings, and that was in 1903. And when Monet brought back the series that he had done there, it was a sellout. So the dealer was working with Duran and said, you know, might be a good idea if you went over to London and tried out your hand at brightening things up over there. So we have this series that Monet did when he was in London, 1902, 1903. And this is a very different interpretation of that location by Derain. You certainly get the sense of atmosphere in Monet. A very different electrically lit place that Duran ended up. It's certainly a very different interpretation of this spot. So this is a Matisse that's actually a study for a larger scale piece that Matisse will take on. This was painted in color at the time, but it's really a study for Joy of Life, which he came back to Paris. The one on the right is a sketch. It's small. It's 16 by 22. The one on the left was a commissioned piece by a Russian collector, Shukin, I think was his name. I'm not sure about that, but this was a piece that was commissioned. It's gigantic. It's 69 by 95 inches. But one of the things I wanted to point out in this is that little circle of dancers in the center of it. And later on in 1909, these become the painting. A gigantic painting, 102 by 150, basically 54 inches. So for me, this wonderful sketch on the right is much freer and has better color in it and all that, though I've never seen this monumental scale piece in person. I know what was going on here, and this was painted in 1906. This is around the time of the Cézanne retrospective. Now, there had been earlier shows of Cézanne's work in Paris. I believe it was in 1903 that there was a big show of his work, and that changed things. But I believe it was 1907 when the full show came. But still, these figures and the distortions in them and the use of them as part of the landscape and part of the composition really comes directly out of Cézanne. Now, this is the large bathers. This is actually the last of the large-scale bathers. Oh, I'm losing it again. So, and you see those little figures across the pond over there. And if you look at the little dancers out in the field there, it's a nod just directly to Cézanne. But you also see this Arcadian vision, this kind of, you know, panpipers and this whole sheep herding, orgiastic gathering. So Cézanne's use of the figure and the distortions in them are really about the composition more than they're about figuration and accurate anatomical elements. There's a shifting around that's happening in these figures, and he allows those marks to be there. He allows that energy of movement to be in the figures and in the trees, in the landscape. Okay. I'm aware that the realist period in painting is over. We are about to embark on a new phase. I believe that lines and colors are intimately related and enjoy a parallel existence from the very start, and allow us to embark on a great, independent, and unbounded existence. This is Duran. And this is post-color again. And now again, Derain would have been, there was a, Gauguin died in I think it was 1893. And there was a retrospective of his work also. But there's a whole symbolist thing that's going on in this crazy, wacky dance piece by Duran. It's a big piece, again, 70 by 90 inches. In good company with Matisse's dance. But you can see the Gauguin and the kind of, you know, symbolic, kind of archetypal, mystical elements, these kinds of earth gods and goddesses. And the Derain is kind of a engagement with that. Now, this is kind of the crossover between the Fauve and the German Expressionists for me. The German Expressionists began in about 1905. So they were aware of what was going on in France, and that really inspired them. Of course, they did have that Norwegian guy ahead of them, and Munch definitely was a crossover. He was aware of what was going on in France, and he was working in Germany, so that color realm was something that they were familiar with. Now, the Germans took it in a very different direction. The joie de vivre business in France was definitely going in a much broodier direction in Germany. And the German expressionists lasted a lot longer than the Fauve. The Fauve group dispersed and went in many different directions. Only a few of them really stuck with the bright colored Marquet and Van Gogh. A couple of people like that stuck with the color, but Matisse came back to it, of course, and integrated it in a different way. And Braque, in his own way, did the same thing. Okay, the blue nude. This was another sea change painting. The power of leaving the movement, where how this figure shifted, what the contours were about, shifting the marks and shifting the position of the painting, of the figure on the painting, and leaving the remnants of those marks there, are part of the vitality of the painting. And this is something which Matisse picked up on from those Cézanne figure paintings. So he was very aware of leaving those marks there and what they would do for the painting, the vitality of the painting. And again, you know, this was a shocking painting, this kind of mask-like face. The French public was definitely shocked by it in a number of different ways. And in fact, the blue, this was from an Algerian model, and in fact, prostitutes in Algeria used to wear these indigo dyed dresses, and their skin would turn blue. So the general public in France would have been aware of the implications of this blue nude. Again, another one of those shockers for the public. Okay, and here we go. So this is 1914 for both Matisse and Derain. They have moved on from the early experiments and have gone in very different directions at this point. Two women, possibly the artist's wife, Alice, and her sister Suzanne, have been chiseled into the picture like statues. The monumental canvas, the simplicity of the figures, and the gray palette evoke thoughts of art from earlier eras. The painting is based on the inspiration from medieval art, French classicist painting, and African masks and sculpture, all united in a hitherto unseen synthesis. Of course, you know, the Cubists were playing around with those African masks, and there's Modigliani, but the years from 1912 to 1914 constitute high point in Duran's production. He left behind his experimentation and frequent changes of style, orienting himself towards an art history instead. In 1910, Derain moved away from Montmartre and closer to the Latin Quarter, the seat of Paris's intellectual scene. And on the left, we have this wonderful Matisse. And again, you can see all the remnants of the changes that took place. In fact, the chair that she was sitting on is dissolved. The color changes in this, you can see the remnants of many layers of color changes in the background and color changes in the figure. If we could see this in person, which actually I believe it is in the Museum of Modern Art, so at some point or other we may be able to see it. The scraping away at the paint, you can see that on the side of the chair. There's this gray that had been painted over it and then scratched back down to let the yellow that was yellow and red that was underneath it to show through. Matisse was very much into this kind of shifting of planes and allowing the memory of the process of the painting to be visible. And here we have a few of those wonderful Matisse watercolors. Actually, the one on the lower right is an oil, but it's got the same feel. But these beautiful, wonderful, loose, light, glorious watercolors. I would love it to see more of them, and I'm going to search for them. And so there's a wonderful YouTube from the National Gallery by this David Gurif. He does a talk on Matisse and Fauvism and gives you more of the outline of the whole group. Maurice Van Link, I did not mean to give the short shrift to. He was a great painter and painted along with Derain. They painted together out in the fields. Brock was terrific. There were just a number of people that this show is going to focus on just this period with Matisse and Duran. But the talk from the National Gallery gives you a fuller sense of what was going on with the Fauve. And then this other Matisse from the Boston Museum of Fine Arts is a terrific, if you're interested in hearing a wonderful talk with a lot of quotes from Matisse, wonderful art historian, does a great presentation. So for me, it's always new, is that one. So I want to invite all of you. We are actually having studio tours in Peekskill on the Saturday the 23rd from 12 o'clock to 5 o'clock. If you check on the Peekskill Arts Alliance website, it will have a map up there. There's also a historic building tour that's going to be taking place that day. One of those, I believe, is going to be at 10 o'clock in the morning, and the other one is going to be at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. So that it could be fun if you're up for it. I am going on vacation in the middle of the month, so my next talk will be on the 30th of September, and we will be exploring one of those German expressionists that I was talking about. Actually, Max Beckmann they're having a show of his work at Gallery Neue, which is, if any of you know it, it's right near the Metropolitan, so worth a try. And I'll see you in person if you come to my studio. Otherwise, I'll see you again at another talk. Bye.